again, thank you, Dean. And to pick up on one point, I know we're going to cover at the end of the day, but I think since we're in the Cronkite School, I think journalists today have one of the toughest jobs in the world, honestly. What journalists, media experts have to go through to try to, tell the truth, provide information, educate society in a world that is just filled with misinformation, disinformation, where I don't want to say fake journalists, but there are so many people who think of themselves as journalists, and, coming from sort of the international development field and knowing what journalists, the threats against them, what they encounter. I think journalism and the profession still remains to be one of the most important in the world. So we're so happy to be here today. But I'm here to introduce our next panel. I'm going to introduce our moderator, and Kristy will take it from there. So Kristy Roschke, please join us up here. Kristy is the media literacy educator and scholar here at the Cronkite School. She is the director of the News CoLab, a Cronkite School initiative aimed at advancing media literacy via journalism, education, and technology. Her research includes misinformation, media literacy, education, and media trust. She has developed curriculum and taught journalism, digital media production, and media literacy courses at the high school and university level for the past 20 years. She currently serves on the board of the National Association of Media Literacy and Education. Kristy's going to lead our discussion today on digital divides, navigating tech's role in American democracy. So if we could have the rest of our panelists.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. Yeah. If the rest of the panel could come and join us, I will introduce you all from our seats. In any order is fine, wherever you feel it. Just doing a little name check there. So I am really excited to be here with these three esteemed panelists. I'll do brief introductions, and then kind of how we're going to do this is each one of you will have about 5 minutes to share some opening remarks, and then we have some questions. We'll do a guided Q&A. So immediately to my left here, we have Dhanaraj Thakur. He's the research director for Center for Democracy and Technology. He's also a member of the McCain Disinformation Task Force that we've been convening for about the last year or so. He leads research that advances human rights and civil liberties online. Over the last 15 years, he has designed and led research projects that have significantly informed tech policy and helped improve the way public policy problems are framed. So all of them have much longer bios than I'm going to read today, and they're in your booklets, I believe. So I'm just going to give the short version. And then we have Ciulla Lipkin, who's the executive director of the National Association for Media Literacy Education. As was just mentioned, I am a very proud board member of this organization. Michelle has served as the executive director since 2012. She's helped namely grow to be the preeminent Media Literacy Education Association in the US. She helped launch Media Literacy Week, which is now, is it going into its 10th year or 11th? This is the 10th year. So if you're not familiar, time to get familiar. She's developed strategic partnerships with companies such as Thomson Reuters, Meta, YouTube, and Nickelodeon, and done a lot of other really amazing things related to namely that she'll talk about in just a moment. And then finally, we have Diana Bowman, who's a professor and associate dean for applied research and partnerships at the Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law and professor at the College of Global Futures at ASU. If you're not from ASU, you may not know that all of our titles are like 1 million lines long. It's really hard to, you can't make them shorter. So Diana is a full professor in the College of Law, where she serves as the associate dean for international engagement. And she's also in the School of the Future of Innovation in Society, which is another little bit of a mouthful. Her research analyzes and informs the development of smarter governance and regulation of innovation in order to simultaneously enhance creativity, improve public health, and stimulate deliberation of the ethical, legal, and societal dimensions of emerging technology. So you can see we have a real powerhouse team here. So my role here is to keep time and to ask the questions. And so are you comfortable going in this order, or? All right, so Donna.
These seats are very comfortable.
Aren't they?
So
my legs are kind of dangling a bit, but it's a comfy spot up here. So I'm glad you're all feeling like, make yourself at home. Dhanaraj, you can kick us off. And I think we can do it seated if that's good for you.
Oh, yeah.
Just casual. Okay, great. Should be on, yeah.
Yes, great. Thank you so much, Kristy. And thank you everyone for joining us, and for the ASU team for the invitations to join this event. Great. So I'm with the Center for Democracy and Technology. I thought I'd start there before getting into some comments about the overall subject matter. So we are a nonprofit tech advocacy group based in Washington, D.C. and also in Brussels. And we've been around for 30 years. So tech and democracy isn't the title of our organization. So we have been thinking about this from like when we think about tech from like email and telnet, go for days, if you all know what that is. We focus on advocacy on essentially in trying to promote human rights in legislation, both in the US and in the EU. And that means we focus on issues like surveillance, privacy, content moderation, and issues like that. When we talk generally about the issues around the intersections between tech and democracy, I think there's been, as some of you who've studied this are familiar with the kind of evolution of thought of like an early kind of optimism around this. There was some very early studies that looked at what was called the Zapatista movement in Mexico. This was in the very early 90s, and there was a lot of like hope and classification of what's called liberation tech at the time. Since then, we've had the evolution of social media and a lot more kind of balanced view on the impacts of these kinds of technologies on democratic participation. And more recently, there's Gen AI, which introduces many different new possibilities and problems as well. There are the couple of like overall themes that I did want to highlight just in this introductory remark is one on the issue of privacy, which is a kind of reoccurring problem in that, particularly with the advent of social media and specifically the way in which social media is built on certain kinds of algorithms that are focused on targeting behaviors and posts of people. In other words, these algorithms are able to distribute information, which is critical to democratic participation, but they're able to distribute information in a very targeted way at specific people and specific communities. And that enables, in some sense, a business model around targeted ads, but it also enables surveillance, corporate surveillance, but also government surveillance. And because of the lack of privacy, federal privacy legislation in the US, this enables an entire industry around the exploitation of these targeted ads, and specifically, I'm thinking of like data brokers. This, I think, is a huge problem for democratic participation, but also if you think of like foreign interference in our democracy, the accessibility to this kind of personal data is available to anyone, including foreign actors. And this has been the case for some time, because of this lack of privacy legislation. So this privacy problem is ongoing, has been there for a while, but is particularly aggravated now. And we will see this continue even with the advent of like the incorporation of Gen AI tools in our like everyday activities online. And so I just wanted to highlight that problem, and I can get into some other problems, but also solutions later on as well. Thanks.
That's wonderful. Thank you for bringing that up. Michelle, you're up.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. And most of all, for including education in this conversation. Education is often left out of the conversation. And so I really, really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I sit in this space through a media literacy lens. Actually, that's the way that I see the world, I think. And I've been leading the National Media Literacy Organization here in the US since 2012. The organization has existed since 1997, long before media was social. Fake news was Jon Stewart, I think, at that time. And AI was still something in science fiction novels. So the world has changed quite a bit since we launched, and it's been an incredible journey. And just a quick word about, namely, our organization. We are the largest membership organization for media literacy education around the globe. We work every day to see media literacy highly valued and widely practiced as an essential life skill. We do that through events, conferences, hosting US Media Literacy Week. And we've really built up partnerships with the tech industry, with the journalism industry, with higher ed institutions, because media literacy is a global issue that needs a global response. What I can say about how this kind of fits into the conversation about democracy and disinformation, I'll actually steal a quote from a report that came out a few years ago from Democracy Ready New York, which is a center at Columbia University. And they basically said to be democracy ready, students need to be media literate. And we took that and we've been using that soundbite quite a bit because it's true. In order to participate in our society, in order to thrive as a citizen in a democracy, you have to be able to understand and navigate the systems in which we communicate and converse. And we cannot do that without media literacy skills in the world today. And what is so important about media literacy is that it kind of goes beyond just identifying whether something is true or false. It really looks at a broader understanding of the media landscape. And so that brings 2 points that I want to make in my introduction. I think our conversations about mis and disinformation are incredibly vital, important. We understand more and more what real world consequences there are with the spread of mis and disinformation, especially in the election space, in the health space, in the democracy space. I believe 2 things. One, we're missing the conversation about why people believe mis and disinformation. We spend a lot of time talking about combating it, really important, but there is a lot of false information out there about why people fall for disinformation, why they fall down rabbit holes, why they become conspiracy theorists. And unfortunately, the public conversation about folks who do fall down the rabbit holes is very negative, very judgmental, and to be honest, false. People don't fall for these things because they're stupid or dumb, or they're manipulated and they're vulnerable. And if we can't have more nuanced conversations about that, we're not going to solve the polarization problem, and we're not going to ultimately solve the disinformation problem. We need to build in more empathetic conversations and more understanding around these communities that really are vulnerable. And we recently did a bunch of work with the National Association for State Election Directors, and the work that we've done with them is really about how do election officials communicate with people that believe false information. They don't need help identifying false election information. They run elections, they know what they're doing. But how do we talk to our constituents? How do we empathize with them? How do we open dialogue with them? And that's really important. The other quick thing I'll say is the conversation around mis and disinformation can limit us to a binary understanding of the communication or kind of the information landscape, right? Because we are saying that information is either fact or fiction, real or fake, and information is so much more complicated than that. And so we need to do more to have a deeper understanding. Just because something is disinformation and we can say, oh, we're not supposed to believe that, doesn't mean we shouldn't be understanding that. We shouldn't be thinking about why does it show up in my feed in the first place? What is the agenda of the people that are spreading it? So we need to think a little bit more deeply about how we attack the problem. And then I'll leave it at that. Sorry. I know, sorry.
That's
Get excited.
great. We appreciate your enthusiasm. Diana.
You're a tough act to follow. I wish I'd been first and not third. First, I would like to thank McCain and Cronkite for putting this event on. Over the last 6 months, I've hosted a number of foreign dignitaries who have come to Arizona because the world's eyes are on this state and what happens this year. So this is one of the most important conversations we could be having. So thank you to McCain, Cronkite, and thank you to everybody in the audience. I also want to recognize there's actually people in this room who have literally put their life on the line to defend democracy in this state. And that is what we're really talking about here. This is not just theoretical. This is real and hard. And we know that this is going to be a tough battle this year. So thank you to those who have actually been in service and actually done that. So I'm a law professor, so it means I'm used to asking the questions. So I want to make sure everybody's a little bit awake. So who in this room actually trusts technology companies? Okay, I've got 3 or 4 hands. You know, who believes government is actually effectively regulating technology companies in the US or even generally? Okay, I like to get a bit of like, the temperature of the audience as we go into these discussions. So, very skeptical. I'm probably, with good reason too, if we think about generative AI and the fact that tech companies have been scraping billions of sites in order to inform large language models. And for me, I am a law professor. I've been working on the regulation of emerging technologies for 20 years. Apparently, I'm finally relevant. It's taken 20 years, but I think about how this conversation has even changed in 1 year and what generative AI has done to this discussion. And I'll use pop culture reference here, but think about the controversy 4 weeks ago when the deep fakes of Taylor Swift were online. Now, that is a popular person, but that is what we are going to be dealing with. Deep fakes are very real and it will have significant impact in terms of elections and democracy. The other thing I'd like to highlight, and just picking up on the earlier comments, is, and I look at Supervisor Gates as I say this, when COVID hit, we did not realize that we had about 900,000 people who did not have access to the internet here in Maricopa County. We have a population of 4.5 million, and nearly 1 million of those people. That is a really important part of this conversation because we have a very real digital divide here in this state. And to be fair, the county stepped up and our board of supervisors actually found $34.5 million to address digital equity issues and actually go out into the communities. And on top of that, the state has been allocated $920 million under BEAD to actually get broadband out into our state. So getting broadband out is one thing, getting access, but you have to give the communities the digital literacy skills so that they do not actually come into this situation and buy into the misinformation. So Arizona is doing an incredible job at the state and the county level to address this. But we do have to think about those people who have not necessarily had access and what that means as we're thinking about our education and who we have to get those education campaigns to. Thank you.
I just feel like we should just sit here all day because you have such diverse perspectives and you're really giving us a taste of just how big this issue is and how many different ways we can talk about it. So I love that you're all gathered here today with your different perspectives. So I'm going to start. I have to put I can't read with my glasses on. I'm going to start with a general question to the group. So it's open to any of you. And you've kind of already discussed this, but I'll try to make it a little bit more focused. So thinking about, our upcoming elections, and I feel like I've heard a statistic and this is probably gonna be fake news. I think it's more than 50% of the world is having an election this year. Of sorts. So again, it's a high number, if not 50%. Someone can fact check me.
It's more than that. I
Is
think
it?
it's like over 60% of.
I was being cautious,
Yeah.
but okay, good to know. As in, I
This
was
is very
close.
media literate. It's just a guess.
I know. We're just gonna spitball it here. But thinking in terms of this being an election year and specifically in the US, what are the challenges and opportunities that we face? Knowing that we live in a technology mediated world and that really trickles into even the process for how we vote. So you can take that to however you want to. And again, I'll just open it up to whoever wants to share first.
I'm going to start this time. I've learned my lesson. So I think one of the exciting things about technology is the opportunities that it creates to increase the number of people who are actually engaged in elections. Online voting is a really great way for people who cannot take the day off, do not have capacity to leave their jobs on a Tuesday. And yet we are very suspicious of online voting, which is interesting to me. So if you look at Estonia, Estonia is considered the leader in digital governance. It was the first one in terms of tax, Senate, They have been doing online voting for years. Approximately 1/3 of their population actually vote online, and they do it from 110 countries around the world. So there are models where this is working and working well, but you have to have trust in the technology, and you have to be able to communicate it with your constituents in such a way as they're willing to actually adopt this technology. So I see really great opportunities, but at the same time, we have to be ensuring that we have robust regulatory regimes to go back to things like privacy and security. We have to build the trust through education and communication. And we have to make sure, and again, to my earlier point, people have access to the technologies so that they can engage in the democratic process in this way.
Well, I think, spoiler alert, our elections are safe and secure, right? They are. The election offices around this country are doing an incredible job keeping our elections safe and secure. They also have to be security experts, physical and cyber. They have to be disinformation experts. They have so much that they need to do. And part of my concern is that they will have to take their eye off the ball because of all this other stuff. And we can't let that happen. We have to let election officials do what they do best and what they're doing well, which is keeping our elections safe and secure. So the challenge in talking about the elections, and I think there's a lot of really smart people talking about elections and funding research about elections, but we're losing sight that the battle is not about our elections being safe and secure, because we know how to do that. Our battle is how we talk about elections, how people understand elections, how we educate around elections, and how we defend our election offices and the people that every single day are defending our democracy, right? I've learned a lot from the state election director work that we've done, and we need to do whatever we can to support them. And so I think there's an opportunity there to make sure that we start from a place that our elections are safe and secure. And so we have to educate around that, and we have to support our election offices so that they can keep doing the job that they do well. The other thing that we need to be aware of, and the risk right now, is that the tech industry has dialed back on things that were even in place in 2016 and 2020. In the layoffs of the tech industry, much of what's been kind of decimated are the trust and safety and the policy and the election programs and all of that. And that's a really dangerous thing, right? At a time where we need our tech industry to kind of double down on protections around elections and mis and disinformation. Really the opposite is happening in some ways. So I would love to be able to say that media literacy is the only answer. Obviously, we need to educate the public, but we need to really push back on the tech industry to really double down, as opposed to decimating some of the protections they have in place. I'd love to hear what you have to say about that.
I completely agree with that. This trend, you see this happening across all the major companies. They have let go their election-specific teams that in the past 2 cycles worked directly with civil society and various other researchers to push back in a coordinated way against mis and disinformation about elections. So that is clearly an area that those companies need to address in this year in particular. The thing I wanted to raise was this issue around the impact on specific communities. So for the 2 years ago, we did a study looking at Twitter conversations around political candidates that ran for Congress in the 2020 elections. And what we found was that women of color political candidates from both parties were subject to more mis and disinformation related to elections than any other group of candidates. They're also subjected to more online abuse than any other group of candidates. And when we talked to those candidates, they described that kind of harassment and attacks, both in terms of mis and disinformation, but also the abuse as, attempts to remove them from the representative process, from representing their communities. And that has a very negative and significant impact on the quality of our democracy when specific groups are excluded from the conversations, from the ability to participate, but also the ability to, form really good policy. This problem, I suspect, could be even worse now because of what you just said about the social media companies pulling back their trust and safety teams, and which could, then have, again, really bad consequences for the quality of the kind of democracy that we have. So this, I think, is an important issue to raise as well, this kind of intersectional problem that we have to deal with across the various kinds of communities in the diverse communities in this country, people with disabilities, talked about veterans, communities of color, et cetera, and as well as different languages as well. This again points the onus on the companies to consider these factors in how they protect or ensure like information integrity on their systems, in the sense that not everyone is receiving the information, or not everyone is like accessing this information the same way. It's just how most services are considered when we talk about how to communicate to different people. We don't assume everyone is the same, but the companies, unfortunately, are doing that to some degree.
I'm going to come back to you with a question in just a sec, but just a couple of things that in these points I'm thinking of. So it's interesting to think of what the trickle down effect of people deciding not to run for office or be in the public sphere because of the foregone conclusion that they will be harassed, that people will be subject to disinformation. When we're facing a presidential election that's like a repeat, right? And that there's already studies and people talking about how that's going to lead to low voter turnout, particularly among certain groups. You think what the pool is going to be for years to come if you know that this is what you're getting yourself into. I'm not sure we're talking about that enough. It's like we're, so a lot of this is around like accusations of censorship was why they've scaled back these trust and safety teams, allegedly. At least in part, because the platforms don't want to be perceived as censoring anyone. But then it becomes kind of a self-censorship if people opt not to participate. So the question I'm going to ask you, Dhanaraj, that relates to what you were just saying is, given these challenges that you've just described and the impact on everyone, but especially on particular vulnerable communities, what role do you think government regulation should play in overseeing these technologies?
Okay, so I have to confess that we're often hesitant of government intervening here because, and I'll explain this. There's definitely a role, but one of the things we would not want governments, state, federal, or otherwise, to be talking about is mandating certain kinds of technologies that are required for companies to use. And I'm thinking of saying, for example, requiring companies to, or companies like social media companies in this case, to use certain kinds of large language models or chatbots or so on, or more specifically, including filters for certain kinds of terms or accounts. That leads to the very problematic situation, and we've literally seen this in other countries where they have more authoritarian leaning governments, to require companies to ban certain kinds of terms or accounts or users or groups entirely from a platform because it's deemed as undemocratic. So what I'm saying is that we should be cautious about opening that kind of door to allowing governments to provide them with that kind of power. But at the same time, they have a critical role to play in addressing one of the biggest problems here, which is this transparency issue, which we've kind of hinted at in different ways. We don't really understand fully how these algorithms work or what kinds of impacts they have on different communities, or more importantly, how they facilitate the spread of mis and disinformation at different communities. Like, we have a sense of it because we can do anecdotal studies, we can have studies with people, we can have observations about how things are spread online, but we don't have the behind the scenes view, which is the really critical view. And that comes from like a lack of participation from the social media companies to provide researchers, independent researchers, with that access. This is where governments can come in. They can mandate these companies to provide some kind of privacy preserving mechanism for researchers, such as those here, include not just academic researchers, but journalists as well, access to that kind of information to understand and maybe better inform policy about how we deal with mis and disinformation generally. So I think in that sense, So, you know, there's specific roles for government, and I think particularly on the transparency issue is a crucial opportunity.
Thank you. I agree. And if we had time, I would ask you what you think about TikTok making their algorithms transparent, but maybe we'll talk about that later.
I have lots of
I'm
comments.
sure you do. So we can have table talk about that. Okay, I'm going to turn to Diana now, shaking things up. So Diana, question for you. I'm going to combine the two that were posed to, just in the interest of time. So how can emerging technologies be leveraged to increase civic engagement? And what are challenges and opportunities there?
Okay, well, I'm going to actually answer the last question first.
Perfect.
Oh, well, actually, the one that wasn't even posed to me. So just around government regulation. So I'm really taking us off script here, sorry. So a place where government can actually play a really big role here is around the investment in cybersecurity, both the personnel and the infrastructure. There are 200,000 people needed for cybersecurity in the US today. And yet we haven't got the people trained up, and the federal government is not investing on this. We've already touched on foreign interference in terms of our elections. We need to actually get government to build out that infrastructure to protect from foreign interference. And we need to actually train. And that is a phenomenal place that government can actually play a role without necessarily enacting what could be considered to be draconian legislation around this. And it is a conversation that we're not having enough of. And we are not having then the private sector invest in cybersecurity for themselves. And I think of Colonial Pipeline. We know what can be done in terms of private sector infrastructure and what that can do to our economy, to our society. And so we really need to be investing there. And the government really does have to step up in terms of playing that role. Now, what was the actual question again?
Oh, I love that. Thank you for sharing. So it just feeds into that. So how can so thinking ahead to these emerging technologies, how can we leverage those to increase civic engagement?
So I love technology, although I'm not the person to be able to turn on half of it. But I am excited in terms of what I'm seeing, how that various technologies have actually allowed more people to actually participate in civic engagement, to be part of the conversation. Where that is challenging is when they get caught in their own little echo chamber. And so what they're hearing is what they want to hear, and they're not actually engaging with that broader debate. So giving people access, giving them the literacy, making them engage and making them feel empowered, I think is a really important part of technology. One of the things we're not talking about yet, but I think is coming, is quantum. And quantum is an incredibly powerful technology that will allow people to actually break encryption that has never been able to be broken again. So if we think about threats to democracy and technology, actually getting ahead in terms of quantum and thinking about how it could be used. At the moment, there's only 300 experts in the world in terms of quantum computing. And yet this is an area that China and Russia are heavily investing because they know how powerful it is in terms of foreign interference. And so we have to be thinking as a nation, as people engage in this space, not about TikTok and not about Facebook. We have to be thinking what is 5, 10, and 15 years out, so that we can leverage this technology in a way that is transparent. And I'm absolutely in agreement with that about black box technologies, but in a way that we actually are more advanced than other nations who are going to be racing to roll this technology out for nefarious means.
Well, I know I'll be Googling quantum technologies when I get back to my seat. So thank you for that news. That was great. I always love to have something else to worry about, but it's good to get ahead.
Sorry, everybody.
So Michelle, question for you. You've already talked a lot about what media literacy can do for us. So again, kind of thinking in terms of the elections and just in light of some of the other panelists' comments, let's talk about how media literacy, digital literacy programs, and educational initiatives can be tailored to meet these specific needs of vulnerable communities. I'm kind of thinking, I mean, it doesn't have to be specific to the access and the digital equity, but just kind of broadly the umbrella of media literacy.
Sure. I mean, I think that one thing to just kind of level set for a second is that, you know, as a country as a whole, we aren't doing a great job reaching students with media literacy education. We see pockets of progress and pockets of incredible practice, very proud of our community and what they're doing in schools and universities all over the country and in communities. But media literacy has never been a national priority for our education system. We see policy change in some states, but no real funding that backs that policy. So implementation is thin at best. And so in general, we aren't reaching everyone, not even close. And the people that are getting media literacy education are often the students that are in communities and in schools that have some flexibility. So we're talking about private schools and, parochial schools, that they have some movement that they can do in their curriculum that isn't just mandated by the state. We have, the schools that have, some, I guess, future looking leaders are looking at media literacy, right? And so we're not getting to vulnerable communities. We are not getting to under-marginalized communities. And that is a huge problem that we've identified, certainly in our last state of media literacy report, understanding like who is getting media literacy, who we're reaching and who we're not. So we have to do a better job at reaching vulnerable communities. We have to do a better job of supporting the teachers within those vulnerable communities. And that's going to likely happen on a grassroots level, which is one of the things that we're working on at our organization, is thinking about how can we really support those grassroots efforts, the community-based organizations that are in those communities. How are we reaching that population? But I do think ultimately we have to look at the whole system, and we have to think about what are the steps we need to take to make sure that media literacy education is an essential skill that is taught throughout the curriculum, throughout the school system, public, like all of it, right? So I think that, yes, we are missing vulnerable communities, but we are missing a lot. And so I think we need to be really, really conscious of that also.
Thank you. I'll give a quick anecdote shout out to a student who just defended her Barrett honors thesis last week. And her project was to create a series of media literacy videos for older adults. And she has shared them now twice with ASU's Mirabella community, which is like I don't know how you call it, but the lifelong learners active adult center that we have that where older adults can live there. It's, like a really fancy retirement home, and they do lectures. And so she's been lecturing there, which has been amazing. And she's already gotten such great feedback. So
wait, Kristy, can I say one more thing on the
Obviously.
education thing? So your points about quantum and Gen AI and all of this, it's so important, so interesting, but we are so behind in the education system. Like, we can't even decide whether cell phones should be allowed in high school, right? Like, we are so far from having conversations that are valuable and impactful around new technology. And my concern is we consistently leave education behind because we're looking into the future. And not that I think we should be doing both. And I think that to me is the most, like, one of the most frightening things, is because we have technology moving at a speed that we can't keep up with, and education not moving at all. And those two things, like, talk about a problem for our democracy, right? If we are not educating our citizens for the world that they are actually living in, leading, running one day, then we have a problem. So I think that we have to really think about all of the future technology issues and all of that, but not leave the students behind and not leave education behind, because we're just not keeping up in a way that is going to be harmful for generation after generation.
Could I add one point just to back up what Michelle
really
said?
quick before you do really quick, I just want to say we have time for a couple of questions from the audience, and there is a microphone here. So if you have a question, this would be a good time to make your way to the mic, and then yes, I'll go. You're good.
Very quickly, it's that we regularly at CDT, we regularly do national surveys of students and educators. And one of the things we found is I think the vast majority of students, just K through 12 students, are already using ChatGPT to various degrees, but the majority of teachers in those same districts say that they do not have guidance from their districts on how to work with the students and properly use these kinds of tools. So just going back to your point.
Another quick anecdote is that my son is in 5th grade and he's been using ChatGPT in his class. And so I was invited in to talk about ChatGPT in the class so that we could provide some sort of guardrails around how and when to use it. My son said my speech was boring. So I don't know how it landed, but he's a tough audience. So any questions from the audience? We have a few minutes to take questions. Yeah, you come up to the mic so we can hear you. And I think someone somewhere is surveilling this for the internet. So we want to make sure we pick up the question.
Yeah, I have a very, very technical question for you. Are you a technologist?
A long time ago, but I can try.
Okay, I was debugging our systems during COVID, and one of my 3 questions is, are we individually franchising? The problem I found is that the one with the most money keeps winning the Who's a Better Candidate contest at a 90% clip. The question today is, how is digital media affecting our democracy? What digital media does, it puts people into groups of people. Groups of people don't vote. Groups of people purchase pots and pans in predictable amounts. The reason those amounts are predictable is because they're in groups. In nature, groups of people are called sets of things. In mathematics, they're called discrete objects. Using discrete mathematics at 100 million people broken up into groups of people, you can now anticipate what those groups of people are going to do in the future at the cash registers or at the polls. If you want to know what 100 million people are going to do before they do it, you have to put them in groups first. You cannot know what 100 million individuals are going to do before they do it because there are too many possible outcomes. The question isn't, could 100 million people in groups pick the one with the more money than the other one 9 out of every 10 times? Absolutely. I've been designing large systems for 35 years. I have a degree in political science on Pi Sigma Alpha. I wrote the balloting system to the Emmy Awards. I even stopped at law school before I went to math class. The question is, could 100 million individuals do that? Could 100 million individuals visit multiple pairs each of 435 plus X pairs of people, and 9 out of every 10 times select the one with more money in that bank than the other one has in that bank in a Who's a Better Candidate contest, casting ballots every 2 years? The only way to know the answer to that question is for the math department to pick up a pencil and combine those 3 integers. You take the 100 million, all of the pairs of people, which is everyone in Congress, that's 435 plus any senators or sheriffs, and you combine those 2 integers with the number of pairs each person is visiting into something called, it doesn't matter what it's called, and you will answer the question between 0 and 1. How likely is it we are going to the polls in groups? That looks to be between 0.83 and 0.94. That is a math question for the math department. And if that is the answer, we are not voting. I understand that sounds ridiculous, but I would like an answer to the question, how likely is it we're not individually franchising, we're not voting, and they're sending us to the polls in groups using digital media the way they sell pots and pans in predictable amounts? That's the will of the people paying for the groups, not the will of the people. I don't.
Okay, so can we have the panel answer the question?
So
If we
Glenn,
can.
that's your
Yeah,
question.
because I got lost in the math. I don't do numbers.
I mean, it's a very interesting question. I don't think I can answer the address like the probability issue you're raising here. What I can say is go back to the point that we raised earlier, that there's been a lot of like discussion and speculation about the use of social media, like buying ads and targeting specific groups and manipulating certain specific groups with mis and disinformation in order to influence voting behavior. And the limited research we have on that at this point is kind of mixed, to be honest. It's not clear whether those attempts at manipulating people with mis and disinformation or others on specific kinds of voting actions is really happening. but there are impacts on specific communities and how they perceive democracy, and their trust in level of democracy, in political candidates, and so on. So that's kind of a broader view of what's happening with regard to impacts, but not the specific thing that you're raising, which I'm not sure how to answer without like more information from the companies themselves.
Ask professor to simply count. Simply tell us 35 seconds. Nobody asked the question, and that's the answer, then it will never get answered. I'm not important enough to call any university and have them answer that question. If anybody here is, I would very much appreciate a discrete mathematics professor for 45 seconds. I've been trying to get this.
Joshua, do you want to take that later? You know math. Joshua will be on a panel later about foreign interference, right? Disinformation. So maybe we can take that up, or you guys can talk offline about some math stuff. That would be great. I think we have time. Do we have time for the one more question? Okay, go ahead, Cody.
Hello. So my question is specifically for Michelle, but welcome. Everyone would love to hear. So PragerU is a conservative think tank that is using scripted curriculum to spread disinformation on racial and climate justice and kind of trying to rewrite said narrative. Arizona is recently one of 4 states that has adopted PragerU as curriculum that is available to our students, our elementary, middle, and high school age students. And the organization is also using digital Google ads, social ads to communicate things like climate change while showing a slime video for your 5-year-old to just
I see them on
love
YouTube
it.
a lot.
Yeah. So wondering what you recommend or think, or just general thoughts, because I'm writing a paper on it.
That is so depressing.
Because I think we see in Arizona specifically with our Secretary of Education intentionally bringing in this disinformation to then roll it out to future generations. So just curious. I'm not writing a final paper on
Is
this.
crying
Not at all.
appropriate?
This isn't for your, this isn't for a class.
This is
Okay,
not for
good.
class, never.
You know, honestly, like, I don't know how to solve that problem. It is difficult and frustrating and infuriating as an educator and as a human that is happening in areas. I think that we have to recognize that education happens in lots of different places in a person's life. So we have to, oh gosh, this is hard, this one. We have to recognize that we have to educate in lots of different ways. And some of it is going to happen in the classroom. Some of it's going to happen at home. Some of it's going to happen on our own. And we have to look at the life of a student. And I don't want to just simply say we have to hope that students really understand the questions that they should be asking when they're given information, and hope that they will be able to assess. But I think in some ways that's what we have to do. I think that if we are teaching them how to ask the right questions, then we can hope that they're going to uncover what is factual and what is true, if they're taught how to do that. I think that one of the problems is what you're talking about is disturbing, but every school is teaching what they are choosing to teach, right? And so like when I teach sometimes at Brooklyn College undergrad, and the first thing I say when I talk through the syllabus is, this syllabus is the one I created. If you took this class with anyone else, they would be teaching it differently. And the videos that I show and the things that I, teach you are things because I think that's the frame that I'm coming to. And we have to teach kids that too, right? We have to teach kids that their teachers are human beings that have their own bias and have their own thoughts, and that there is a process that's selective. And so we have to teach them that too. That was not a good positive answer, but I'm trying my best on that one.
So
Do you have thoughts?
I do, and I'm going to say it really quick while I say thank you very, very much. This was obviously just the beginning of much longer conversations that we need to have throughout the day and then beyond. So thank you for being here. I was just going to say something about PragerU in particular and some of these other things is that these are coordinated campaigns, persuasion campaigns in a way that public education is not able to do because it's disaggregated in such a way and it's local versus federal as by design. And so no one public school can coordinate a campaign the way that PragerU can. So in addition to what Michelle said, I would say we need to teach people of all ages about persuasive techniques and how persuasion is built into everything that they're seeing online, starting at the earliest ages so they can understand what they're seeing as just an add-on to that. But I know that they're going to take out the cane and cane us the music's going to start playing. So again, I want to thank everyone for being on this panel. This was a great way to start the day.